Welcome to Shattered Reality with your hosts Kate Valentine and Fahrusha. Prepare to have your paradigms shifted and your truths questioned. And now, Shattered Reality.
Hi, this is Fahrusha, and I'm here with the wonderful Kate Valentine.
Well, thank you, Fahrusha. Good to be with you as well.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Yeah, another year.
Welcome back to our podcast here. I wanted to tell everyone how we have just gotten a new website, and you should put it down. It's www.shatteredreality.com.
And you can get all our podcasts right there, and you should. They're great. But today we have an even more interesting guest. We have Mr. Robert Schroeder, and he has written a phenomenal book, and it's been on the Kate Valentine show as well. And it is Solving the UFO Enigma, How Modern Physics is Revealing the Technology of UFOs. In that book, Bob discusses a phenomenon that he describes as the bulk. And when I saw the film Interstellar, I almost fell out of my seat because they mentioned that same term, the bulk. So, Bob, congratulations. You got there before all these stars did.
Kate and Fahrusha, thank you very much for those nice comments. And I'm actually very, very glad to hear that Hollywood is beginning to pick up on things that are going on in modern physics, because I believe we're going to find in the not-too-distant future that this technology, we're going to have access to it ourselves.
Absolutely. And just to make it clear for the listeners, you are not a physicist by profession. And this is a hobby for you? A lot of people don't get interested in math and physics as a hobby, Bob.
I know. However, I should mention that I come from a family of scientists and engineers. I have a degree from Rutgers University in mathematics. I come from New Jersey, by the way, from Teaneck, New Jersey.
Yay!
And I have a degree in aerospace engineering.
Cool. So you are a physicist. I didn't know that. You embarrass me. I apologize.
Oh no. Well, not exactly a physicist, but getting there. and I have an MBA too. But I should mention that I also come from a family of scientists and engineers. And my dad was a chemist. His dad, my granddad, was a mechanical engineer. Our daughter is a structural engineer down in the D.C. area.
Wow.
And I have like 20 or 30 nephews, nieces, cousins, and stuff like that. And most of them are in technical fields too. So I come from that kind of a background. And just to give you an idea, I right now I'm in the process of studying the math of the field equations of general relativity.
Wow, that's impressive. And it does bring up the question of nature or nurture.
Yeah.
In terms of, I'm not championing either. I think it's probably a combination. But with such a family history, my goodness, I bred myself a little mechanical engineer and a design engineer myself here with a double major in that. And all the males in my family, while they weren't officially engineers, were all involved in building ships in the shipbuilding industry and did engineering kind of work. So I have to wonder about nature or nurture.
I totally agree. I have an identical twin brother, and his passion for math, science, physics is just like mine. And he's an identical twin, not fraternal. And then I have identical twin sisters.
Oh, my. Oh, my.
They say that it's only one chance in a million that a family will have two sets of identical twins, and we hit the jackpot.
Wow, that is incredibly impressive.
And then I have another brother and another sister, but they're single, not twins.
Did they feel left out?
I think they might have.
Let me ask you an unrelated question to the book at this point, but we are a paranormal podcast here. Did you and your brother or your sisters between each other have, any form of ESP between you as twins?
That's an interesting question. I'll tell you a story. It probably is ESP. I was up in the White Mountains hiking with some friends, and my identical twin brother was supposed to be coming up, but I didn't know which day. We were hiking for like a week up there.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, I don't know if you know the White Mountains in New Hampshire, but we were way above tree line, and there was we were probably 600 or 700 feet below a ridge. And then on the other side of the ridge were trails that came up from the base down below, and we were up around 5,500 feet or so. And anyway, I was walking along with my friend Ed and the other people from the club, and all of a sudden I just had this feeling like I don't know exactly how I got it. It just happened, that my brother was on the other side of the ridge. And so Ed said, no way, Bob, could you tell? I said, well, I just sort of felt it. And we got up on top of the ridge, and sure enough, there's my brother Dave climbing up the other side.
That is good. That's a good one. That's a good story of ESP between identical siblings. Yeah.
But I have an even better one.
Okay.
This is Fahrusha?
Yes.
Yeah. And
this is Fahrusha.
well, I have another one. Actually, my wife seems to have psychic abilities. Now, mind you, I come from a family, on my side of the family, engineers, scientists, and stuff like that. And my wife is very down to earth. She's not. She has no interest whatsoever in paranormal or psychic stuff or anything like that. However, she seems to have psychic ability, and this is what kind of convinced me that there may indeed be something to ESP and some of these other paranormal things, besides just UFOs. But one day, my wife and my daughter had gone to church, and I would have gone with them, but I was so engrossed in a project I was doing at home. I was putting in pull-down stairs going up to the attic. To make a long story short, I was up on a 6-foot step ladder, and I fell off the ladder. And we didn't have carpets down, and we had a hard plywood floor below. And I fell 6 feet backwards onto the plywood. It was about half past the hour, so the church service was only half done. And I slammed into the plywood, and it kind of knocked the breath out of me, although I remained conscious. And of course, when you take a fall like that, you worry about breaking your back and being paralyzed.
Sure.
And so I remembered stories where people would wiggle their toes and their fingers. So I did that. and then what happened was everything seemed to work. So I said, okay, I'll try to get up. And so I slowly got up, and then I stood at the top of the stairs there, and I was sitting there thanking my lucky stars, thanking God, And then all of a sudden I hear the garage door open, and my wife and daughter come running in, and Carol, my wife, runs to the bottom of the stairs and says, "Bob, are you okay?"
Wow!
And now the church is 3 miles from our house, and there's no way they could have heard me. And of course, inside the house, and and yet Carol told me that she knew something had happened to me, and I have a little bit of a flu, so I may be coughing here and there. So that astounded me, and it made me realize that something is going on that we do not understand yet, but I think it's real.
Well, Fahrusha is quite a psychic herself, so she could perhaps discuss
with you. Sometimes people who are naturally psychic like perhaps your wife, they sort of take things for granted. Sometimes people just think that everybody can pick up these signals or clues, and they're very surprised when everybody else doesn't know it.
You know, Carol has done. That may very well be with Carol. She doesn't make a big deal of it, and it's happened on other occasions too. And I'm just amazed. I think some people are amazed at their abilities, but as I mentioned, my wife is very down to earth.
Oh, that's good.
And she just doesn't, think it's anything too extraordinary. But I think it's amazing.
Well, it could be very useful, as you see in your case, because had you been more badly injured than you were, she may have saved your life by coming home. So it's
right.
certainly not a useless talent. And I'd have to say that psychic abilities come in different flavors. Like some people are empaths. They can sort of feel what others are feeling, while some other people just know facts. And still others can, move things at a distance. And there are all sorts of different psychic abilities. And I would say that psychic ability is like singing, that most people can sing Happy Birthday. Some of us are unfortunate and can't even carry that tune. But there are people who sing like Michael Jackson or Pavarotti or Macklemore or whoever you happen to like at the moment. And those are the psychic stars. But nobody has all the talents. So the person that can produce movement in inanimate objects may not be the person who can know what you're thinking about.
Yep, and I wonder too, Fahrusha, if the UFO phenomenon, some of the physics that Kate and I have discussed, could be associated with psychic phenomenon, and including these mediums who seem to be able to talk to people who have passed over to the other side. Mm-hmm. And so, like the Long Island medium, Teresa Capuzzo or something like that. Uh-huh. And I've seen her on TV, and I don't think they're faking that show. I think it's real. And there's something going on, And maybe as we get a little further into the show and I talk about some of the physics, you'll see the possible connection between these psychic phenomenon and the UFO phenomenon, and which I think I think that may help us understand what's going on.
I have one thing to put in to this conversation here, and that is that people who are experiencers, and I am an experiencer, seem to sometimes get additional psychic help after having been an experiencer. And I'm not saying this about myself particularly, but that experiencers do turn out to be more psychic sometimes than they were before they started having experiences. So I don't know if you can speak to that at all, but that has been what I have discovered in reading about people and meeting other people who are experiencers, that they had a shift in their consciousness and became more aware.
Fahrusha, I have heard stories where people have been injured, like they've had a concussion or something like that, and then after the concussion, they develop these psychic abilities. And yes. I might add, and I can add one other thing that I know for sure. My wife, when she gets a headache, she doesn't have the psychic abilities, but after the headache has subsided, she can start picking things up again. So
Interesting.
there's something in the human brain, in the neurological system, that is somehow picking up these signals from some other place, which maybe, as we talk about the UFOs, I can mention.
Bob, I was going to say, since you're an engineer, and we know there's a lot of information floating around in the air right now, and if you have an iPhone and you dial in the proper frequency, you can get that information. And so I've mentioned to Fahrusha several times that if we had the proper antenna and the proper frequency, there's a lot of information that we could pick up at this time. And some people have that antenna built into their brains and others do not. So I think it might actually be just a physical thing more than a mental thing, too.
Yes, I agree. And, Kate, that's a very, very interesting observation. And as maybe I can jump a little bit into the physics of UFOs.
Sure, please do.
Okay. I believe, as I've mentioned on your show, on your other show, the Kate Valentine show, and that and not just myself, but the physics community believes that there may be, we may live in an 11-dimensional universe, and if that's true, some of the theories suggest that we live on what they call a space-time membrane, and it's a 4-dimensional. It's actually a 10-dimensional space-time membrane. But of the 11, this gets a little bit complicated, but I'll try to go through it quick. Of the 11 dimensions that they think exist out there, it looks like 6 are wrapped up at every point in space-time in tiny little spaces, and they're not really relevant to what the UFOs or the psychic stuff is involved, or probably not. But that's still, 11 minus 6 still leaves 5 large dimensions. And we already know we live in a 4-dimensional universe, 3 of space and 1 of time. And these physicists, modern physics thinks that we're living on this 10-dimensional space-time membrane, but that there's another 10-dimensional space-time membrane next to us, and of course of those 10 dimensions, 6 are wrapped up at every point in space-time, leaving only 4 large dimensions that we experience. And however, that since there's 11 dimensions, that leaves 1 extra dimension, and that means that we have 1 extra large dimension. It indicates that we're living in a universe where there's 5 large dimensions, and so what's exciting about that is that space between those membranes or between those universes, which physicists call the bulk, B-U-L-K. And I believe a lot of these phenomena that we're experiencing or observing, like UFOs or psychic phenomena, are probably connected to the configuration of that extra 5-dimensional space between the bulk, between the membranes, and that's what I think is going on. And it turns out that one of the theories that comes out of these, what they call string NM theory, M stands for membrane. One of the theories that comes out of it is something called warp geometry. And warp geometry, developed by a Harvard physicist and another one from Johns Hopkins University, they believe there's a big problem in physics called the hierarchy problem, and it's the puzzle of why gravity, there's only 4 fundamental forces in nature, electromagnetism, the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force, and gravity. But the 3 non-gravity forces, the weak nuclear force, strong nuclear force, and electromagnetism, are exponentially stronger than gravity. Gravity is incredibly weak. compared to those other forces. And it's such a big problem in physics because it makes no sense that it even has its own name. It's called the hierarchy problem. And and anyway, they've been trying to solve this problem for decades, and they haven't had much luck. But with these latest theories, and particularly this one called warp geometry, they think that gravity gets stronger at the deeper you get into the bulk. That is, they think gravitons, that the particle that carries the gravity force, 99.99999% of all gravitons may be, they believe, are located in that bulk area, and that that gravity, if you were able to leave the space-time membrane that is our universe here, if you were able to leave it and go into the bulk, the deeper you got into the bulk, the stronger gravity gets. And in fact, it reaches a strength of 10 to the 16 power stronger than what we experience here in our universe. And what's exciting about that is the second I saw this theory, as I mentioned to Kate, I realized that if UFOs could get into the bulk, that general relativity tells us that distance shrinks in a strong gravity field.
Yes, yes.
So if these guys, if they can get their ships into the bulk, and I'll just give you one interesting example. Alpha Centauri, which is the closest star system to planet Earth, is 4.3 light years
Yes.
From planet Earth, or 25 trillion miles. So it's a heck of a ways. It would take us centuries to get there with our rocket ships, and anyway. But on the other hand, if you could get into the bulk only to the point where gravity is only 1/10,000th of its maximum strength in the bulk, just that relatively short distance into the bulk, the distance to Alpha Centauri shrinks from 25 trillion miles all the way down to 25 miles. And I think that's what the UFOs are doing. If this bulk is real, if these extra dimensions are real, and if they are warped, as these Harvard physicists are saying, then it may be how UFOs get to planet Earth. In other words, and that's really exciting. But I also think that that bulk area may explain other phenomena like psychic things and stuff like that.
I have a question for you, and that is, do black holes lead into the bulk? Because as I've read about black holes, I'm not a scientist or an engineer, but some of the things I've read about them say that the gravity becomes much stronger within the black hole.
That's actually a very good question. It's Fahrusha. It turns out that you've heard of the Large Hadron Collider particle accelerator in Geneva, Switzerland.
Yes, yes.
Well, they expect to create something called Kaluza-Klein gravitons, and these are a kind of graviton that are much stronger than the normal graviton that we experience on planet Earth. And in fact, they will get up in strength to 10 to the 16th power stronger. That's 1 followed by 16 zeros. Stronger. Yeah, that's a big, big number. Stronger than the gravitons that we have on planet Earth. And in fact, they're so strong that if they do create them at the Large Hadron Collider, scientists figure that they will induce the creation of micro black holes.
I've heard that. I didn't understand why.
And
I
that's
think you
why.
just disconnected me. Huh? Okay.
Yeah, and that's why they're going to. They expect that these will be created, but it will only happen if the extra dimensions exist. So there's a lot of excitement in the physics community because there's some other reasons which I'll explain in a minute. But anyway, these micro black holes, the interesting thing about them, in fact, you may have remembered some of the controversy.
Yes, I
about
do.
the-
I wrote
the
about it on my blog, in fact.
Oh, you did. Well, there was some concern among many people, newspaper editors and journalists and stuff, that if they started creating these micro black holes, they might grow bigger and eventually swallow Switzerland. And and of course that would be a real catastrophe, because we'd have no more Swiss chocolate.
There you go.
I want to just really quick interject this. This physics sounds very complicated. Bob Schroeder makes it very simple, and he goes over it step by step in his book, Solving the UFO Enigma. If this sounds interesting to you, get a copy of this book, because it's not just theory with him. It's not like he's saying, I wonder what would happen if they had a graviton like this. All of his theories are based on fact, and he goes over them in his book, Solving the UFO Enigma. I'm sorry, but I had to get that in, Bob. Right back
And
to you.
I have a question for you at the same time.
Okay.
You had mentioned
Thank you, Kate. Yeah.
if
Yeah.
the 11 dimensions are real. Now, you as a mathematician, isn't it the case that they have been proven mathematically?
Oh, well, not exactly. They have to, Fahrusha, they will have to prove it experimentally. Mathematically, you can have any amount of extra dimensions, and some of the earlier mathematicians like Bernard Riemann, a German mathematician way back in the 1850s. He's one of the guys that kind of played around with these ideas of extra dimensions and stuff. And but they haven't been proven yet. Mathematically, it's clear that they could exist, but experimentally, we don't know yet. And so I do urge everyone who's listening to pay attention to what's going on at the Large Hadron Collider, because it's going to be firing up again.
Yeah.
They ran it a year ago, and they shut it down. And so originally they were running it at 7 trillion electron volts, and now they're going to run it at double that, 14 trillion electron volts. This baby's going to be really packing a wallop, and so that they do expect some really interesting physics to come out of it, including the possibility of the discovery of extra dimensions. And if it does turn out these extra dimensions are real, I think at that point things get really exciting, because I think it's going to set the entire physics community on a new path, a relatively new path, really looking for the physics associated with these extra dimensions. And if I could just jump back for a second, as I was mentioning that hierarchy problem, the discrepancy between the weakness of gravity and the strength of the much stronger non-gravity forces. Well, for decades, for probably 4 or 5 decades, they've been working on another theory called supersymmetry, and that theory was supposed to solve the hierarchy problem. But supersymmetry didn't necessarily need extra dimensions, but on the first run of the Large Hadron Collider a little over a year ago, and they spent like 6 or 8 months running the thing, they found no evidence of the particles, of the lightest particles predicted by supersymmetry. And anybody who has copies of the May 2014 Scientific America will notice that on the front cover it's in red. It's a red front cover, red color. It says a crisis in physics, and then they talk about the apparent failure of supersymmetry to explain the hierarchy problem. But that's actually good news for those of us who believe the extra dimensions might be real, because if supersymmetry fails, it means all these theories on extra dimensions, which have been kind of the black sheep of the family, they now come to the forefront and become much more credible than they were before. And so that's what I think is so exciting, because I believe that we may be on the threshold of discovering these extra dimensions, and it's going to lead to very interesting exotic physics, I believe, in the fairly close near future.
Sounds fascinating, and it does seem to explain how the UFOs may not be seen traveling through our solar system all the time, but that they suddenly appear in the atmosphere and that disappear just as quickly. It also seems to possibly explain, and my jury is out on the Sasquatch issue, but people for hundreds of years have reported Yeti and Sasquatch and Yowies and these large hominids, and they seem to come and go out of our dimensional universe.
Space-time. Yeah. On the Sasquatch, just real quick, the primatologist Jane Goodall believes, she's pretty famous for the work she did in Africa.
Absolutely.
She believes that there might be something to the Sasquatch, and so I know that's not what we were going to be talking about tonight, but I think somebody with her credentials and background, for her to come out and say that, she talked to the Indian tribes on the West Coast, and she came to the conclusion that virtually every Indian tribe up and down the West Coast, up into Canada, has a name for this creature, and then of course the number of reports. If she pointed out on a show I saw on TV, are in the thousands. I mean, thousands and thousands of reports. So I'm kind of convinced there probably is something to the Sasquatch. I kind of think it's Gigantopithecus, a great ape, a giant ape that they believe was bipedal, that lived in Asia, and it probably crossed the Bering Strait at roughly the same time as humans did, coming from Asia to the Americas, the Native Americans, And but you know what? I was going to say one other thing, Fahrusha. You had mentioned the black holes going into the bulk. I didn't quite finish that. Actually, the KK gravitons that create the microblack holes themselves, those KK gravitons, will have a tendency to move into the bulk, and that's their natural home. And microblack holes may do the same thing, although they may actually just stay right on the membrane we live on, and but I believe what these UFOs may be doing is surrounding their craft with KK gravitons, but enough of them that the entire craft, because the KK gravitons want to go to the bulk, that's their natural home where they ordinarily live. So I believe what they do is they surround their craft with these KK gravitons, and then that pulls the UFO into the bulk. And I think that's how they get there. And the microblack holes that they create swallow photons, which is why they call them black holes. Photons go at the speed of light, and those are the light particles are the equivalent of light waves. But it turns out that gravitons, four-dimensional gravitons that exist in our universe, also travel at the speed of light. So when I was looking at the possibility that they might create microblack holes at the Large Hadron Collider, the thought occurred to me, gee, what if those microblack holes could swallow I knew they swallowed photons, but could they swallow gravitons too, four-dimensional gravitons? So I did some searches in something they call archive.org, which is where physicists pre-publish papers before they go into regular magazines and stuff. And and sure enough, I found all these articles that physicists were going to be looking for exactly that, the possibility that gravitons might be swallowed by micro black holes at the Large Hadron Collider. That's one of the things they'll be looking for. And the second I saw that, I knew how UFOs are able to hover above planet Earth. And I think this is what they're doing. I think what they do is they swallow ordinary four-dimensional gravitons. Now, those four-dimensional gravitons are constantly exchanged. They're actually what they call virtual gravitons, and in order for space to be warped according to general relativity, there has to be a message or a signal sent back and forth between a mass like the planet Earth and the sky above it. And so these four-dimensional gravitons do that job. And so, for example, when an airplane is going overhead, the airplane itself is producing gravitons, and the planet Earth below is producing gravitons, and these are exchanged between the plane and the Earth, and that's what allows the Earth to, in a sense, tell how much mass the airplane has, and even though all objects, as Galileo pointed out, whether a feather in a vacuum or a cannonball, all fall at the same rate. So gravity is actually an acceleration field. And oh boy, I'm sorry to get into the technical stuff, but
it's fascinating.
But the key thing is that if these UFOs are able to swallow four-dimensional gravitons by creating kind of an envelope of micro black holes around the UFO, which may explain that glow that you see around them, then what happens is the planet Earth, instead of seeing a 30-ton UFO, sees only something as light as a frisbee, and so for that reason, these UFOs don't need a lot of thrust. They don't need gigantic engines because even though their mass is really the equivalent of 30 tons, as far as the Earth is concerned, the Earth only sees something that lightweight like a frisbee. And just to add a little more intriguing evidence for that, almost everybody who sees these circular UFOs notices that they're spinning on their central axis.
Yes.
And now think about when you have a frisbee in your backyard. It's very lightweight. If you tried to throw it across the yard without spinning it, it would just wobble and become unstable. So what do? You spin it. And that's exactly the same reason UFOs are spinning, or the outer rim is spinning, to stabilize the object, because as far as the Earth is concerned, it's a very lightweight object. And that kind of lends a credibility to the possibility that they're not using anti-gravity, they're actually demassing these craft. I believe that's what they're doing. And by demassing the craft, one of the things that makes UFOs a puzzle to Earth science is their ability to accelerate at blinding speed.
Yes.
And well, it turns out, I think the way they're able to do that is we can accelerate a bullet, of a low mass bullet, at blinding speeds, but only because it has such low mass. And I think, at the heart of general relativity is a postulate called the equivalence principle, which equates inertial mass to gravitational mass. And what I believe these craft are doing is they are basically eliminating the gravitational mass of these craft, and that reduces, because of the equivalence principle, that reduces the inertial mass. Now, the inertial mass is very important. even if you're in the middle of space where no gravity is acting on you, if you try to accelerate your spaceship, you'll still be pressed back in the seat if you try to accelerate at high speed. However, if you were somehow able to reduce the inertial mass of your ship, you could accelerate even in a non-gravity field to blinding speed, and it wouldn't affect you at all. And I think that's how the UFOs are doing it. I think basically they're reducing the gravitational mass, which is equivalent to their inertial mass, and that reduces their inertial mass, and then they're able to accelerate at these incredible speeds.
I have two questions for you. I don't mean to interrupt you, but two questions come up. The first question is surrounding the spinning of the UFOs, which has been noticed by a number of observers, and it has been used in the past by people of science, or at least people who were making scientific theories, that that speaks to the idea that some of the UFOs may come from a different time, like they could be visitors from the past or the future. Now, of course, time is simply another dimension, so perhaps that's possible. But the idea of spinning apparently has been used in some experiments, and correct me if I'm wrong, in Austria to bring things forward in time.
Fahrusha, I think I've heard a little bit about that. I'm not totally sure. There's a guy, and I can't think of his name, an Austrian physicist. I think you can do that. I got it. I don't remember the guy's name, but maybe I'll think of it. But I believe you can move particles, subatomic individual quantum particles, forward and backward in time, but I don't think you can move a large object made up of many, many quantum particles back and forth in time. And Stephen Hawking, the English physicist, who's a real expert on general relativity as well as quantum mechanics, has given a lot of thought to the idea of time travel. And it's his conclusion that large objects cannot go backward or forward in time, conglomerations of quantum particles like us, And so I do think it's possible that Austrian physicist, I do think, was able to take individual electrons and push them forward and backward in time. But but it's far more complex. Not saying that a more advanced civilization couldn't do it. Maybe they can. But I don't think Stephen Hawking came up with some, and I can't remember the exact objections that he had, but he came up with certain theoretical reasons why it wouldn't be possible or something,
But
and
there was also... Oh, sorry. There was also the theory that during World War II, the Germans had worked on that with the Glocke, and it was put up in a Stonehenge type of apparatus, and the people who lived in the area said that there was some device that kept spitting in there, and then it was all sort of poo-pooed and said, no, that actually hadn't happened, but spinning was part of it.
For time travel.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bell, the Glocke.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I personally, I doubt that the Germans had anything like that back then, because part of the reason is simply if they did have such advanced technology, they would have won the war. And but
they may have been on that same track, like working along those lines.
I sort of doubt it.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, as a matter of fact, quantum mechanics comes out of Germany, Heisenberg, Germany and Austria, and in England too, and France as well. There's a lot of people involved, but basically, Max Planck in Germany in the year 1900 came up with the first idea that particles at the quantum. He's the guy that kind of was the father of quantum mechanics. And then other scientists, including Einstein, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, Paul Dirac, an English physicist, and I'm having a senior moment here. I can't think of some of the other ones, but there's a whole bunch of people. But so Germany was definitely a leader in developing quantum mechanics, and of course Einstein lived in Germany when he developed general relativity. And however, these guys were not involved, even though Heisenberg was in Germany during World War II. He certainly never wrote anything about experiments being done over at that, I think he called it Glock or something like that.
Glock is just German for bell.
Oh,
It's called the bell.
Oh,
The
okay.
Die Glocke.
Yeah. Okay. I know that if anybody would have been involved in it, it would have had to have been Werner Heisenberg, and I know he wasn't. He never wrote anything about it. So I'm afraid these are the kind of stories that kind of start out. I think they were probably doing experiments over there, and but I don't. But they and in fairness, during the war, Germany did develop a lot of technology, like jet engines, practical jet engines. They developed the rockets. They developed probably the first remote-controlled missiles and things like that. And they were working on the atomic bomb as well, but they simply didn't have the manpower.
Hitler purportedly didn't want to use atomic power because he called it Jewish science. I mean, this is not from me. This is from things I've read. I don't know this to be true or false, only that I've read that.
Whoops, wrong again.
I don't. Yeah, he may have. It's possible he said that. I don't know. But I know Heisenberg himself worked with many Jewish scientists, and after the war, he continued to work with many Jewish scientists.
Oh, I'm sure.
And stuff. So that Heisenberg, that is, and so I don't. Even if Hitler had said something like that, it certainly wouldn't have stopped the non-Jewish scientists in Germany from working using like general relativity, which was developed by Einstein.
Right.
He would not have, not used it because Einstein was Jewish.
Well, Bob, you're just saying that the groundwork for all the theory that you're working on now sort of got its start in the first, 1900 to let's say during the war 40s. So if World War II had not occurred and this research had continued, possibly we would have, and let's say your theory is correct with the gravitons, and we could even have had our own UFOs by now.
Yeah. Actually, not that I'm an advocate of war, but the war accelerated the technology, the nuclear technology. It caused enormous resources in the United States as well as Germany and the other powers to be put into research on nuclear weapons and applications of quantum theory and stuff like that. And although it's a tragic way for it to be developed, it did accelerate the research on nuclear technology, which, by the way, has some people would consider beneficial, had some beneficial side effects like nuclear power plants. Now, of course, many people today oppose nuclear power, but other things too, like MRIs, magnetic resonance imaging, is developed from quantum theory, and I believe a lot of that wouldn't have occurred as fast as it did were it not for the tremendous amount of research done during World War II. I think that really helped.
Bob?
And oops.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I just wanted to pull us back a little bit closer to the UFO subject, though this is
Yeah.
all extremely fascinating. People in the UFO field have pondered for quite a while if the UFOs are advanced beings in a craft of some sort, why is it that they need to have lights on? And I thought I've heard this on other UFO shows constantly, this question of, why don't they just fly in the dark if they don't want to be perceived and they're really an advanced civilization from Zeta Reticuli or wherever?
Yeah.
Why do they have lights on? It's because of your interest in physics. Perhaps you could I know this is a sort of a trick question in a sense that we never, mentioned that we would be asking such a question. But since it is an ongoing question in ufology, maybe you have an answer for us on that.
Actually, Fahrusha, it's a very good question because that actually it would seem that they could somehow stay hidden all the time. But however, I think this is what's going on. As I mentioned before, I think when they, in order to stay levitated, and oh, by the way, there was a study done by a guy by the name of Ted Phillips.
Yes, I know Mr. Phillips. Yes.
Oh, no kidding. That's great. And he worked for Dr. J. Allen Hynek for a while, and he estimated that from impressions made on the ground, he estimated from UFOs, he estimated that these craft, the typical disc-shaped 50-foot diameter UFO, weighed in around 40 tons, and so that's pretty heavy.
Yes.
That's a lot of mass, and so in order to levitate those things, they have to be doing something pretty extraordinary. And as I mentioned before, I believe what they're doing is they're creating these micro black holes in kind of an envelope around the craft.
Fascinating.
And so, but in the process of doing that, they excite the molecules of air around the craft, because what's happening is these molecules of air are being sucked into these micro black holes, and they accelerate to very, very high speed as they get closer to the micro black hole. And of course, as a particle gets to a high speed like that, it becomes very excited because there's friction and things like that, and it becomes very excited and begins emitting electromagnetic waves in various parts of the spectrum. And I believe that is one of the causes of what appears to be the light around these UFOs. In other words, it's simply a side effect of their technology, their propulsion system, their technology needed to keep the craft levitated to demass the craft. And that would definitely explain, but in addition, when micro black holes decay, because they only last for a short period, they decay into something called Hawking radiation, named after that English physicist Stephen Hawking. And so the Hawking radiation itself would interact with the air molecules near the UFO, excite those air molecules, and those air molecules in turn would also emit electromagnetic waves. And so I believe that's the cause of the light that's seen around UFOs, and it's just simply a side effect of their technology. And but I think, I think they do try to generally. I think here's something that many people might be surprised at. I think we ourselves may be relatively close to understanding UFO technology, possibly within a decade or two, or sooner. And I think one of the reasons why, right after we developed nuclear weapons and nuclear technology, there seemed to be a flurry of UFO sightings in the more advanced countries around the world. And if you guys remember, back in the 50s, 52, 54, 57, and those years, we had scads and scads of UFO sightings, and a lot of them were, as Robert Hastings, he's the guy that wrote about nukes and you probably know, and nukes and UFOs. He pointed out that these UFOs definitely appear interested in our nuclear weapon sites around the planet. And here's what I think is going on. And this is kind of fascinating because it may imply and indicate that we are on the threshold of understanding this technology, our own physics community with these theories that I was mentioning before that they've developed. But these UFOs, if we do figure out in the next few years how to get into the bulk, then we will have the capability, may have the capability to travel to other star systems easily, and Mother Nature would provide a highway to get there. And I think that these UFOs know from experience, if you notice, these UFOs always seem to act the same way. And I believe most likely these UFOs are coming from many, many different civilizations, not just one. But they all seem to behave in a similar fashion. When somebody approaches a UFO landed on a road or something, the UFO occupants quickly get on the craft and take off in a hurry, and I believe the reason why they try to, not allow us to get too close to them, partly it might be they don't want us to get injured by the Hawking radiation or the other type of radiation that's emitted. But the other reason, I think, is because they know we may be fairly close to understanding their technology, and they don't want us to prematurely figure it out. And I think that's, and so, but that implies that there may be a federation of advanced civilizations. They're all acting in concert. They're all behaving in a similar fashion from many different civilizations. And so what I think what they're doing is they know once a developing civilization like ours has developed a nuclear technology, they know that we're within decades, maybe 5, 6, 8 decades from developing the ability to penetrate the bulk and travel to other star systems. And I think what they don't want is they don't want us taking our nuclear weapons to their other Federation star systems.
Well,
and
aside from that, too, Bob, back in 52, when they had all those sightings over Washington, if you ever read a book by Frank Ficino, Shoot 'Em Down, you become quite convinced that there was actually a battle of some sort between the UFOs and the United States Navy. And it sounds very sort of unbelievable, sort of science fiction-y, but when you really read through his books, and it has to do with the Flatwoods Monster, and he backtracked all these craft to a large mothership over the Atlantic, it really starts to make a lot of sense. And we surprised the UFOs by some of the technology that we had developed that they were certainly capable of doing themselves, but it was unexpected. And so because it was unexpected, they were actually able to penetrate their resources. So I'm sure we quite convinced them that, yes, as Stanton Friedman said, we are a tribal civilization with killer instincts or something like that.
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, so
Angry apes with guns, in short.
Something
Apes
along
with
those
guns.
lines. So I think they're quite reluctant for us to develop this, and I don't know why the Hadron Collider stopped. Do you, Fahrusha? Run out of money, was it?
Well, there was.
No. They were refitting it, to go from 7 trillion electron
Oh,
volts.
it's just a resetting.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. And they had to do some technical changes that would bring it up to
How do you account for the silence in the universe? I think it's a French name, French physicist had a question. Well, if there are all these civilizations, and there should be.
Fermi? Was it?
Yeah, the Fermi.
The Italian.
Italian.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And
All you Italian Americans out there, don't come down on me.
yeah.
Sorry.
Uh-oh.
The Fermi paradox.
The French have their own problems these
Yes.
days.
The Fermi paradox. How do you explain that can you explain that in terms of the bulk, or how would you
Well,
explain
Stan
it?
Freeman had a great answer for that. He said,
Yeah.
where are they? He goes, it's simple. They're here.
Yeah.
And it is true. I mean, the
Amen.
UFOs aren't
Amen.
hiding. They're all over the place.
But what about the background noise that should be out there of developing civilizations? Maybe
Well, you're assuming it's going to be radio or
Well,
something
or
along
television
or
or
whatever.
something. Something
Actually,
vibrational.
Right.
Fahrusha,
Yes.
one of the radio telescopes did detect what appeared to be an alien signal, and occasionally they detect things that look like they're intelligent and in design, but they tend to be just flickers
Sporadic,
and sporadic. Yes, sporadic, and I believe that the reason that's so is because if we do figure out how to penetrate the bulk in the next few years here, within a decade maybe perhaps, then that means that radio was developed back in 1900 and Marconi, and so that means that it's barely a century between the development of electromagnetic using radio and penetrating the bulk. Assuming we do penetrate it within a decade or so, it's just a little over a century. So in other words, that may explain exactly why we're not hearing radio signals all over the place, for the simple reason that all these other civilizations realize they can just use the bulk to get to Alpha Centauri in 20 minutes, and they don't need to send a radio signal that takes 4.5 years. And so they end up they give up the radio telescopes pretty quickly. We have radio telescopes all over the place now, but they may if the extra dimensions are real, and we were able, and the warp geometry of the 5-dimensional bulk is real too, and we're actually able to get in there and go to other star systems, we should be able to. When the distance we're traveling is only 25 miles. It wouldn't make any further sense to maintain these radio telescopes because now we're going to be able to visit and travel to any place in the universe and very quickly. And so I think that's why we're not hearing signals. All other civilizations are similar to us. They just give up on the radio telescope stuff very quickly, very early.
We're sort of coming close to the end of the hour, Bob, and I really want to ask you this one question.
Okay.
You and your family are all, as you noted, science backgrounds, engineering backgrounds, certainly interested in this sort of thing. When you get together, as you mentioned you have over the holidays, and you bring up the subject of UFOs, what is their opinion of it?
That's a good question.
Especially your psychic wife. What does she think?
She's kind of accepting of it, but she's not terribly interested in it.
Mm-hmm.
If I can put it that way.
Okay.
It's sort of, and my sisters are not particularly interested either.
Mm-hmm.
But my brothers are. My identical twin, just like me, fascinated by the potential of physics to penetrate the bulk and the Large Hadron Collider, all that stuff, And my other brother, similar, also has a exactly similar interest too. This may sound sexist.
That's okay.
But I do notice that my male relatives appear to have much more interest in the possibility. But on the other hand, a few of my female relatives do too. So, but I can say on the male side, most have an interest. On the female side, a couple. So it's kind of broken down that way. But I also might want to add that it's just myself and my twin brother and my other brother Charlie that are mostly are deeply involved in investigating this. But on the other hand, if it ends up that the bulk does exist and they're able to send a probe in there and look at the possibility of traveling to other planets, I can absolutely guarantee all the males, all the females in the family will be absolutely glued to the work that we're doing and physics is doing.
We will be too. We will.
I was going to say, I'll be right there with you.
And
excellent.
We really appreciate your agreeing to be on our program, and you will notice that we are two women here talking about UFOs. So there are at least a few of us.
Fahrusha and Jackie, I was thinking about that. That I realize a lot of the people that I deal with in the UFO field are indeed female, like Dr. Lynn Katai down in Phoenix, Arizona, and
Leslie Kane
others
too. Boy, so that's
Leslie Kane.
Leslie Kane.
Oh my God! And let's not forget to mention Angela Joyner, who pointed out in her blog this was the 6th anniversary of Stephenville.
Yes.
Yeah, gosh, she really paid the price for being interested, though.
Indeed.
Yeah, and
what happened?
Also, she was sort of
the reporter,
not fired, but sort of let go from.
She was the reporter down in Stephenville, Texas, who
continued to investigate after she was told not to.
Yes, and she was a very well-respected reporter. She lost her job, and she continued to be interested for a number of years, and I think she's sort of fallen away from it a bit now, but she was a very interested participant in ufology for about 5 years there, I'd say.
Yes, and I give her a lot of credit for bringing it to as a journalist for speaking out about it publicly, and I didn't realize that she may have gotten into a bit of trouble over it. That's really too bad. But I'll tell you what, if it turns out that these ideas that I'm playing around with, that modern physics is going on the right path, I will be one of the first people involved in this and setting up a company to build these.
Kate and I will be on the first voyage.
I want that IPO, Bob. I want it.
And heck, I want you in the company.
All right, I will be there.
And Angela Joyner too.
Okay.
And get you all in there.
All right.
And because this would literally replace all the contemporary transportation and things like that.
I can't even imagine where that would go.
Yes, it would be quite fascinating.
So much more than just transportation. Wow.
Yes.
But anyway, unfortunately, this sort of concludes another episode of Shattered Reality.
Can you tell us where
your
book is available, Solving the UFO Enigma, where we can
yes. They can, if people would like to buy the book, they can buy it. They can go into Amazon.com and they just put Robert Schroeder Solving the UFO Enigma. It should pop right up, and people can take a look at what people have written about the book, the reviews and stuff, if they'd like to see them, and that would be great. I appreciate you mentioning that.
Oh, there's a lot of skeptics out there too, Bob, and before they get too involved in their own skepticism, I really think they should read your book. You do make the physics very, very understandable. You don't require a degree. It's really pretty straightforward text for a basic understanding. And after they read that and they're still skeptical, then by all means go to your website or ours, and we'd love to hear from the audience to see what they think about all this.
Absolutely. We would love to hear from our audience. We would love to hear about their experiences, and we will put them on the air either anonymously or with their names if they wish. We are interested in knowing what your experience in the paranormal with UFOs or otherwise is, and we will let others know so we can help to solve the many enigmas that surround the paranormal world.
That sounds fantastic, and of course, by the way, I want to thank you guys for having me on your show.
Our pleasure.
Absolutely. Always interesting.
Coming up on Shattered Reality, we have former MUFON star investigator Chase Kletzky, who is going to be speaking about her book and about her experiences investigating UFOs for MUFON and onward. That's our next session. And after that, we have a personal friend of mine, Natalie Sudman, who wrote a book called The Application of Impossible Things. Natalie is an archaeologist who worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in Iraq and was blown up by an improvised explosive device on the Iraqi roadway. And she had quite an extraordinary out-of-body sort of experience. She calls it the blink, and she's going to be talking about it right here on Shattered Reality 2 sessions from now. So thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Fahrusha.
And I'm Kate Valentine. So till next time, goodbye.
Bye.